The door opened just a crack, and the first thing I felt was the cold. Not the thin, sharp bite of a Denver morning at 6 a.m., but a different kind of chill. The kind that seeps right through your coat, past your skin, and into your bones. It was the chill of a welcome that wasn't there. My daughter, Emily, stood in the sliver of space, blinking against the new sun. Her hair was a mess of sleep-tousled curls, her face bare of the makeup she'd wear for her wedding photos. For a fleeting second, she was my little girl again, squinting at me from her bedroom door after a bad dream. But the look in her eyes wasn't childlike. It was stunned. Blank. "Mom," she said, her voice a rough whisper. I didn't know you were coming." 800 miles. That's the distance from my quiet little house in Dallas to this doorstep. 2 full days of driving, fueled by cheap gas station coffee and the sheer, stubborn power of a mother's love. I'd sung along to old songs on the radio, my worn suitcase resting on the passenger seat like a trusted friend. I'd pictured this moment 1,000 times, her flinging the door open, her arms wrapping around me in a tight, familiar hug, the scent of her perfume mixed with the smell of brewing coffee. I pictured her laughing, maybe with a few happy tears, saying, "You made it." Instead, I got silence. The hum of the road still echoed in my ears, a ghost of the journey I'd just made for nothing. My hand, gripping the handle of that suitcase, suddenly felt weak, the plastic slick with a sweat that had nothing to do with warmth. I had driven 800 miles to be told I was a surprise, an unexpected guest, an inconvenience arriving at dawn. The words hung in the air between us, colder and more solid than the morning frost on the lawn. My own daughter, looking at me as if I were a stranger who'd knocked on the wrong door. My world tilted on its axis, the familiar ground beneath my feet turning to sand. But before we continue, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We're really happy to know that our stories have reached people everywhere. Just as I was trying to form a response, to find a single word that could bridge the canyon that had just opened between us, a figure appeared behind Emily. Tyler Brooks, the fiancé. He slid into the doorway, an arm draped possessively around my daughter's shoulders, pulling her back slightly. He wore a silk robe and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. It was a politician's smile, a salesman's smile, the kind of smile that assesses you, prices you, and dismisses you in a single glance. "Maggie," he said, his voice smooth as oil. He didn't try to hide his surprise, but unlike Emily's, his was laced with something else, annoyance. "We figured your $63,000 guaranteed your seat, not your early arrival. $63,000. He said the number so casually, so clinically. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't the sum of a lifetime of sacrifice. It was a transaction, a ticket price. My retirement fund, the nest egg I had carefully built over decades of double shifts and budgeting, the money that was supposed to be my safety net, had been reduced to an entrance fee. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The world went quiet, the chirping of a nearby bird fading into nothing. All I could hear was the number echoing in the hollow space that had just been carved out of my chest. $63,000. I saw it all in a flash. Selling my car when Emily was in high school to afford her debate club trips. Refinancing the house, my house, to pay for her college tuition. The endless nights I'd spent worrying, praying, working, all to give her the life I never had. And this was the result. A man I barely knew, standing in a doorway paid for by my labor, informing me that my love had been weighed, measured, and assigned a dollar value. Emily didn't even flinch. She just stood there, a puppet under his arm, her silence a confirmation. In that moment, standing on that cold concrete step with my suitcase in hand, I wasn't a mother. I was a wallet. I was a line item on their wedding budget. I was a problem to be managed. The door was still only half open, but it was clear it would never open for me. Not really. It was a gate, and I was on the outside. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a period at the end of a sentence, the sound of finality. the sound of a life's work being dismissed with a flick of the wrist. The door wasn't just closed, it was sealed, and I was on the wrong side of it. For a moment, I just stood there. The weight of the suitcase, once a symbol of my hopeful arrival, now felt like an anchor, pulling me down into the cold, hard concrete of the porch. I could feel the faint vibration through the soles of my sensible driving shoes. The house was alive in there, humming with the life I had funded, but was not welcome to join. I imagined the warmth inside, the smell of coffee that would soon be brewing, the quiet murmurs between my daughter and the man who was systematically erasing me from her world. My breath hitched, a single, sharp gasp in the quiet morning. I had to move. I couldn't stand here, a statue of rejected motherhood for the neighbors to see when they left for work. Dignity. It's a funny thing. It's the last thing you have when everything else has been stripped away. So I turned. I didn't look back. I walked down the pristine flagstone path, a path I'd helped pay for with a small bonus I'd received last year, and made my way back to the car, my 2012 Honda Civic, reliable, Vic. Paid for, mine. It felt like the only thing in the world that was still truly mine. I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar worn fabric a small comfort. I didn't start the engine. I just sat, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The windshield framed the perfect curated picture of their life, the manicured lawn, the freshly painted trim, the charming little porch where my own daughter had just looked through me as if I were glass. And that's when the memories came, not in a gentle wave of nostalgia, but as a flood, a torrent of images and feelings so powerful it felt like drowning. Emily was 8 when her father left. I remember the night so clearly. The silence after his car pulled away for the last time, the way Emily stood in her pajamas, her small hand clutching mine, her eyes wide with a question she didn't know how to ask. What now? I knelt down, looked into that trusting little face, and made a silent vow. I would be enough. I would be both. I would build a world for her so safe and so full of love that she would never feel the peace that was missing. That vow became the engine of my life. Enough meant double shifts at the diner, my feet aching so badly I'd have to soak them in Epsom salts every night. It meant the smell of grease and burnt coffee clinging to my hair, a scent I could never quite wash out. I'd come home late, the moon high in the sky, and creep into her room just to watch her breathe. Her small chest rising and falling was the only proof I needed that I was doing the right thing. The exhaustion was a currency, and I spent it all on her. I remember the day I sold my car, a slightly newer sedan I'd been so proud of. Emily had been accepted into a summer program for gifted students, a trip to Washington, D.C. It was an opportunity I couldn't let her miss. The cost was just beyond my reach, a few $1,000s that might as well have been $1 million. So, I put a for sale sign in the window of my car. I handed the keys to a young college student and took the cash, my heart a strange mix of pride and loss. For the next 2 years, I took the bus. I learned the schedules by heart, stood at windy stops in the rain, and never once told Emily the real reason we were a one-car family. It was a sacrifice made in silence, one of hundreds. It was just what a mother did. When it was time for college, the numbers were staggering. FAFSA forms, student loans, tuition bills that looked like phone numbers. The thought of her starting her adult life shackled by debt was unbearable. So I went to the bank. I sat across from a loan officer who looked at me with polite pity as I signed the papers to refinance the house. My house, the one I had worked my entire life to almost own. I was leveraging my own future, betting my entire tiny slice of the American dream on her. When she graduated, debt-free, holding that diploma, the smile on her face made it feel like the best bet I'd ever made. After graduation, there was the first apartment. I paid the security deposit and the first 2 months' rent just to give her a running start. I helped her shop for secondhand furniture, and we spent a weekend painting the walls a cheerful yellow. Then came the car, a reliable used Toyota, so she wouldn't have to worry about getting to her new job. Each step, each milestone, I was there. Not as a crutch, but as a foundation. I was the silent, steady scaffolding that allowed her to build her life. I never wanted thanks. I just wanted to be a part of it. Then came Tyler. At first it was subtle. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed to adore her. But then the talk started. The little comments dropped like poison into a well. It was always about independence. "Emily needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet, Maggie," he'd say with that plastic smile, his hand on her shoulder. "We don't want her becoming too dependent, do we?" It sounded so reasonable, so wise. Oh, but independence was a code word. It meant independence from me. Calls became less frequent. Visits grew shorter. Suddenly, Emily was too busy. She started parroting his language. "Mom, I need to figure this out for myself." Tyler thinks it's important that we establish our own lives. I watched as a wall was built between us, brick by insidious brick. Each brick was a missed phone call, an unanswered text, a holiday spent with his family instead of me. He was isolating her, cutting the ties to the only person who had ever put her first, and he was doing it under the noble guise of helping her grow up. My daughter, who had always been so strong-willed, became passive, agreeable. His voice became hers. The final fatal blow was the wedding. They sat in my living room on the couch I'd had for 20 years and laid out their vision. It wasn't a wedding, it was a production, a grand affair at a historic Denver hotel, with a guest list full of his colleagues and clients. It was a performance of wealth and success they didn't actually have. And then they told me the price tag, $63,000. The number hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. That wasn't just a number, it was my retirement. It was the sum total of every double shift, every skipped vacation, every penny saved. It was my future. It was my security. It was my promise to myself that after a lifetime of work, I could finally rest. It was supposed to be for a small condo near a park, for trips to see the ocean, for the simple peace of not having to worry about money in my final years. Emily must have seen the shock on my face. Her eyes, which used to hold so much life, were now filled with a practiced, pleading look. "Mom, it's our dream. We'll pay you back, I promise. It's just to get us started." Tyler didn't plead. He just sat back, confident, as if the outcome was already decided. He was the director, and we were just actors reading his script. I looked at my daughter, the little girl I had built a world for, and I did what I had always done. I said yes. I transferred the money, the entire nest egg, my future, my peace of mind, my security, liquidated and poured into their dream, a dream that, I now realized, sitting in my cold car outside their perfect house, had never included me. The lifetime of giving hadn't been a foundation. It had been fuel, and they had burned it all to power their own ambitions, leaving me with nothing but the ashes. The minute Tyler Brooks spoke that number on the porch, it wasn't just an insult. It was an erasure. He had taken a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and devotion, and erased it in a single, brutal minute. The memories receded, leaving behind a silence in the car that was heavier than any sound. The past had played itself out behind my eyes, a long, cinematic montage of sacrifice, and the credits had rolled. Now, I was left sitting in the present, a stark, unwelcome reality framed by my windshield. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the perfect lawn. A bird landed on a perfectly trimmed hedge, chirping a cheerful, oblivious tune. It felt like a mockery. I don't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes? 20? Time had lost its shape. I was suspended in a cold, clear gel of understanding. The shock from the doorstep encounter had crystallized into something hard and sharp in my gut. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a thoughtless mistake. This was a strategy. This was the result of a long and deliberate campaign. My thoughts were cut short by a rap on the driver's side window. I flinched, my head snapping to the side. It was Tyler. He was no longer in his silk robe. He was dressed now, in crisp jeans and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He looked fresh, rested, and utterly in control. He gave me that same plastic smile, but this time it was tighter, tinged with impatience. Behind him, standing a few feet back near the porch, was Emily. She had her arms wrapped around herself, her gaze fixed on a particularly interesting patch of grass near her feet. She wouldn't look at me. She couldn't. I took a breath, held it, and then slowly pressed the button to lower the window. The clean, cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of cut grass, and I imagined his expensive cologne. "Maggie," he began, his tone a carefully crafted blend of concern and condescension. It was the voice one uses on a confused elderly relative. "We were worried about you, just sitting out here. Why don't you come inside? We can make some coffee, talk this through." The invitation was a lie, and we both knew it. It wasn't an offer of comfort. It was a command to move the problem off the street and out of public view. "Come inside where we can manage you." I looked past him, trying to catch Emily's eye. She was a statue of avoidance. My heart ached with a pain so fierce it was physical. I wanted to scream at her, "Look at me! Look at what you are letting him do to us!" But I kept my voice even, quiet. "There's nothing to talk through, Tyler." Emily made it clear. I wasn't expected. His smile didn't falter. He was prepared for this. This was part of his script. "Now that's not true. Of course we expected you. We just had a different timeline in mind. The wedding day is a whirlwind. You know how it is. We wanted you to arrive tomorrow, rested and ready for the rehearsal dinner." He was rewriting history in real time, painting their shock as a simple scheduling mix-up. He was painting me as the one who was confused, who had gotten it wrong. "What I know, Tyler," I said, my voice still quiet but gaining a steel edge I hadn't felt in years, "is that my daughter told me she didn't know I was coming." He sighed, a theatrical puff of air. The mask of patience was slipped perfectly into place. "Look, this is getting complicated for no reason. It's just a small thing. The ceremony itself, we decided to keep it super intimate." He leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Just immediate family." There it was. The final, clean cut. The surgical removal. Just immediate. Family. The words seemed to hang in the air, shimmering with cruelty. My mind, which had been a maelstrom of emotion, suddenly went still and cold. It became a calculator, an abacus. I started doing the math. Immediate family. When Emily was 8, that term meant two people, me and her. It meant the two of us against the world. It meant me holding her hand in the emergency room after she fell off her bike. It meant her sleeping in my bed after a nightmare. It meant every birthday, every Christmas, every scraped knee, and every A+ on a report card was a victory we shared. We were a unit, indivisible. Now, that term had been redefined. The equation had been rewritten. I looked at Emily, still staring at the ground, a silent accomplice to my amputation from our own story. In the new math, immediate family meant her and Tyler. His parents, whom I'd met once, his brother, who was his best man, a neat, tidy circle drawn in the sand, with me standing on the outside. I was no longer part of the core unit. I was an attachment, an appendix, a sentimental relic from a past life that they were graciously willing to tolerate, from a distance. Emily finally spoke, her voice thin and reedy, still directed at the lawn. "Everything's already allocated, Mom. The seating, the photographer's shot list, it's all set. It would be too complicated to change it now." Allocated. The word was so cold, so corporate. It was the language of spreadsheets and budgets. It was the word an accountant would use. You allocate resources. You allocate funds. You don't allocate a mother. My lifetime of love wasn't just unappreciated. It was a logistical problem. My presence was an inconvenience that would disrupt the seating chart. My desire to see my only child get married was a complication for the photographer. I looked at my daughter's averted face and saw a stranger quoting a memo. This wasn't her. These weren't her words. They were his, fed to her, rehearsed, and now delivered to me to neutralize the situation. The cold calculation in my head continued. I had allocated my savings to her education. I had allocated my time to her well-being. I had allocated my entire future, my $63,000 future, to this very event, an event where I myself had not been allocated a seat. They were subtracting me from my own family. It was the most brutally efficient emotional calculus I had ever witnessed. They had taken my love, my support, my financial lifeblood, and factored it into their plans. They had used it, spent it, and absorbed it. And once the resource was depleted, once the check had cleared, the person attached to it was no longer necessary. I wasn't a mother. I was a solved variable. The answer was 0. Tyler saw the look on my face change. The hurt was being replaced by something else, something he couldn't read as easily. He switched tactics, moving from condescending patience to feigned generosity. "But of course, you'll have a place of honor at the reception, Maggie," he said brightly, as if offering a grand prize. "We've allocated a whole table for extended family and friends of the family. You can sit there." Friends of the family. He had just demoted me. In the space of a single conversation, I had gone from mother to unexpected guest to a logistical problem, and now to a friend of the family. It was a breathtakingly swift demotion. I would be allowed to watch the party from the cheap seats. I would be allowed to eat the dinner my life savings had paid for, surrounded by strangers, while the real family celebrated in their intimate circle. I finally turned my full attention to him. I looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time, he saw something other than the pliable, accommodating woman he had so carefully managed for the past 2 years. He saw the woman who had worked double shifts, the woman who had faced down bill collectors and landlords, the woman who had single-handedly raised a child in a world that wasn't always kind, the woman who was, at her core, a survivor. My voice, when I spoke, was dangerously calm. "I see." That was all I said. 2 words. But in them, he heard the shift. The ground was moving beneath his feet, and he knew it. His smile faltered for the first time. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Emily looked up finally, her eyes wide with a dawning panic. She had felt the change too. The atmosphere had gone from tense to arctic. They had pushed too far. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed the woman who gave everything would continue to give, even when she was given nothing in return. They had assumed the emotional well was bottomless. They were about to find out it wasn't. They were about to learn what happens when you subtract a mother down to 0. Sometimes you don't get nothing. You get something else entirely, something they had never, ever allocated for. The 2 words, "I see," hung in the air between us, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The cheerful bird in the hedge fell silent. The hum of distant traffic faded. In that small pocket of silence, I watched the confidence drain from Tyler's face, replaced by a flicker of something he was not accustomed to feeling. Uncertainty. He had planned for tears. He had a script for hysterics. He was prepared to manage my grief, to soothe my hurt feelings with platitudes and false promises. He had not planned for this. He had not planned for the quiet, chilling clarity of a woman who had just seen the absolute truth. Emily took a half step forward, her hand reaching out slightly, an involuntary gesture of panic. "Mom," she started, her voice a fragile thread. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. To look at her now would be to let the floodgates open, to let the lifetime of love and hurt pour out of me in a torrent that would only serve his purpose. It would make me the emotional, irrational one, the problem. And I was done being the problem. I held Tyler's gaze for 1 second longer. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to see the exact moment the foundation he'd built his future on began to crack. Then I turned my back. The walk from his spot on the driveway to my car was the longest journey of my life. Every step was a conscious effort, left foot, right foot. My legs felt like they were moving through deep water. My breath was a steady, controlled rhythm in my chest, in, out, a mantra against the chaos screaming inside my head. My heart was not steady. It was a shattered thing, a cracked porcelain cup trying to hold itself together, the pieces grinding against each other with every beat. But from the outside, I was calm. I was a woman walking to her car. That was all. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel their confusion radiating across the perfectly manicured lawn. They were waiting for me to turn around, to break down, to give them the scene they knew how to handle. Every step I took away from them was a refusal, a silent, powerful no. No, I will not cry for you. No, I will not beg for a place in my own family. No, I will not play my assigned role in your carefully staged play. My hand was steady as I fished the keys from my purse. The familiar jingle was a small, solid sound in the unnerving silence. I unlocked the door, the click echoing in the morning air. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door behind me. Click. The sound was a mirror to the one I'd heard just minutes before when they had closed their door on me. But this one was different. This wasn't an exclusion. This was a boundary. This was the sound of a vault being sealed. Inside this small, worn interior of my Honda Civic, I was safe. I was in my own territory. I rested my forehead against the cool, smooth plastic of the steering wheel. The smell of old coffee, stale air fresheners, and the faint, dusty scent of the upholstery filled my lungs. It was the smell of my real life, the life of budgets and commutes and quiet solitude. It was the smell of the truth, and in that moment, the truth was a brutal comfort. My heart was no longer just cracked. It was actively breaking, sending sharp, painful splinters into my lungs, making each breath a deliberate, agonizing act. They didn't love me. It was that simple. They loved what I provided. I was the family ATM, the emotional janitor, the fixer. For my entire life, my role had been to make things better, to smooth over the rough edges, to absorb the pain so others didn't have to. I had cleaned up spilled milk, bandaged scraped knees, and later paid off credit card bills and co-signed on loans. I had fixed everything. I was the constant, reliable fixer in Emily's life. And what happens when you spend your whole life fixing things for someone? They never learn to fix anything for themselves. Worse, they come to see you not as a person, but as a function. A tool. You are the emergency contact, the lender of last resort, the unconditional yes. And Tyler? He had seen that. He hadn't created the dynamic, but he had perfected it. He had weaponized my love, my instinct to help, and used it to build his empire on my ruins. My hand, which had been trembling, stopped. A profound, icy calm washed over me. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer in control. My mind was sharp. The years of managing a household on a shoestring budget, of juggling bills and deadlines, of being the sole architect of my and my daughter's survival, that part of me took over. The part that knew how to get things done. The fixer was about to fix one last thing. She was about to fix the mistake of her own self-erasure. I sat up straight. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with a picture of Emily and me taken 2 years ago before Tyler. We were laughing, our heads close together, a genuine, uncomplicated joy in our eyes. It was a picture from another lifetime, a lifetime that was now officially over. My fingers moved with a steady, deliberate precision across the screen. I found the number for my bank, the one I knew by heart. I pressed the call button and lifted the phone to my ear. The automated voice was cheerful, robotic. "Thank you for calling Consolidated Trust Bank. Your call may be monitored for quality assurance. Please say or enter your account number." I recited the number, my voice even, detached. "Thank you. For security, please state your full name and the last 4 digits of your Social Security number." I gave the information. Each word was a small, solid stone, laid carefully on a path away from the woman I used to be. "Thank you, Maggie. How can I help you today?" I paused, took one final, steadying breath. "I need to speak to someone in the fraud department, please, regarding a wire transfer." There was a moment of silence, then a series of clicks as the automated system rerouted my call. A new voice came on the line, this one human. A woman, her tone professional and alert. "This is Brenda in the Fraud and Security Division. How can I help you, Ms. Reynolds?" "Hello, Brenda," I said calmly. "I initiated a wire transfer 2 months ago. I need to stop it immediately." I could hear the soft clacking of her keyboard. "Okay, I see a transfer here for $63,000 initiated on April 14th. Is that the one?" "Yes," I said. "That's the one." "Ms. Reynolds, that transfer was already processed, and the funds were moved to a holding account pending release to the vendor. It's scheduled to be dispersed tomorrow morning to historic Denver Grand Hotel. Stopping it at this stage is highly unusual. May I ask the reason for the cancellation?" This was it, the moment of truth, the moment I had to put a name to the thing that had been done to me. I could have said anything. I could have said I'd changed my mind. I could have said there was a mistake in the booking. I could have made up a lie to smooth it over, to avoid the ugliness. That's what the old Maggie would have done. The fixer. But the fixer was gone. I looked out the windshield at the house. My house. The house my future had paid for. And I spoke the truth, clear and cold and undeniable, into the phone. "The reason," I said, my voice not wavering for an instant, "is family fraud." The clacking of the keyboard stopped. Brenda, the professional on the other end of the line, was silent for a full 3 seconds. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. It was no longer just professional. It was serious, protective. "I understand, Ms. Reynolds," she said quietly. "One moment, please." I heard more typing, faster this time. I pictured the digital locks snapping into place, the red flags appearing on the account, the entire financial machine grinding to a halt on my command. I had built that machine with my life's labor. I had every right to shut it down. "Okay, Ms. Reynolds," Brenda said, her voice firm. "I've placed an immediate and indefinite freeze on the transfer. Those funds will not be dispersed. They are frozen, pending a further investigation, which you will control. I've also placed a security alert on your primary accounts. No funds can be moved or withdrawn without you speaking directly to me or a senior manager. Is there anything else I can do for you today?" The knot in my chest, the one that had been tightening for 2 years, finally loosened. It didn't disappear, but it was no longer strangling me. "No, Brenda," I said, a wave of profound, exhausted relief washing over me. "That is all. Thank you." I ended the call and let the phone drop into my lap. It was done. The power pivot was complete. I was no longer the constant fixer, the endless resource, the open wallet. I was a woman with boundaries. I had stopped the bleeding. For the first time, instead of fixing their problems, I had protected myself. I looked at the house one last time. It looked different now. Smaller, flimsier. A house of cards built on a foundation of lies. And I had just pulled out the bottom card. I put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a low, reliable rumble. It was the sound of my own life, waiting for me. I put the car in reverse, backed out of their perfect driveway, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I knew what I would see. 2 people, standing on the edge of a world that was about to come crashing down around them. And for the first time, it wasn't my job to fix it. I drove. I had no destination. The neat tree-lined streets of suburban Denver blurred into a meaningless watercolor of green and beige. Left turn, right turn. It didn't matter. I was a ghost ship, my hands gripping the wheel, my gaze fixed on a horizon that wasn't there. The engine was a low, steady hum, the only constant in a world that had just been shattered. The immediate, cold adrenaline of the phone call to the bank was beginning to recede, leaving a hollow, vibrating emptiness in its wake. I had done it. I had actually done it. The act itself had been so simple, a few words spoken into a phone. But the implications were seismic. I had detonated a bomb in the center of the life I had built, and now I was driving through the fallout. My phone, lying face down on the passenger seat, was silent. For now. It was the silence of a predator gathering itself to strike. I knew it wouldn't last. They would have noticed by now. Not because they were thinking of me, but because their perfect, curated world would have hit its first snag. A phone call from the hotel's event coordinator, her voice professionally apologetic. "Mr. Brooks, there seems to be an issue with the initial payment transfer. It's been frozen." The first ring was a shrill, violent sound that made me jump, my foot jerking on the gas pedal. I glanced at the screen. Emily. My breath caught in my throat. The old instinct, the one honed over a lifetime of motherhood, screamed at me. "Answer it, she's upset, she needs you, fix it." My thumb hovered over the green icon, my own body betraying my newfound resolve. I could feel the Pavlovian response, the deep, cellular programming to soothe my child's distress. But the woman who had sat in this car a half hour ago was not the same woman sitting here now. The woman now had a memory, sharp and cold as an icicle, of a half-closed door and the word allocated. I let it ring. 1 ring, 2, 3. On the 4th, it went to voicemail. The silence that followed was a small, personal victory. It was the first time in her adult life I had not immediately answered her call. A few seconds later, the phone buzzed. A text message. Then another. And another. Then, the ringing started again. "Emily." This time I answered. I pressed the icon, put the phone on speaker, and laid it back on the seat. I said nothing. "Mom!" Her voice was thin, laced with a frantic edge I knew all too well. It was the voice she used when she'd lost her keys or when her car had a flat tire. It was her, "I have a problem, and you are the solution" voice. "Mom, what did you do?" I kept my own voice flat, devoid of emotion, a barren landscape. "I'm not sure what you mean, Emily." Don't do that," she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "The hotel. They called Tyler. They said the payment was stopped. They said it was flagged for fraud. Why would you do that? What is wrong with you?" What is wrong with me? The question was so absurd, so completely detached from the reality of the morning, that I almost laughed. "There is nothing wrong with me, Emily. I stopped the transfer of my money." "But it's for the wedding! It's for our wedding!" she wailed, and in the sound, I heard the petulant frustration of a child whose favorite toy had just been taken away. "My money," I repeated, the words tasting strange and powerful on my tongue. It was a truth I had not spoken aloud in years. It had always been our money, the family's money, money that was just an extension of her own needs. "It is my retirement savings, Emily, and I've decided not to spend it." "Because of this morning?" she cried. "Because of a stupid misunderstanding? Mom, you're overreacting. Tyler was just trying to explain." "There was no misunderstanding," I said, and the finality in my own voice surprised me. "I understood perfectly. Now, I have to go." "Mom, wait," she pleaded. "You can't just do this. You're ruining everything." I pressed the red icon on the screen. Click. The silence rushed back in, but it was different this time. It was a silence of my own making. I pulled the car over to the curb of a quiet, residential street, parking beneath the shade of a large oak tree. My hands were trembling, but not from weakness. It was the aftershock of the explosion. The phone rang again almost instantly. I glanced at the screen. Tyler. Of course. The puppet had failed, so the puppet master was stepping in. I let it ring, watching his name flash on the screen. On the 5th ring, he gave up. A moment later, a voicemail notification appeared, then a barrage of texts. Then he called again. This time, I answered. I had to hear it. I had to know the full shape and texture of the man my daughter had chosen over me. "Maggie." His voice was low, controlled, but the faux friendliness from the driveway was gone. This was the voice of a CEO addressing a rogue employee. "Put Emily back on the phone." "She's not with me," I said. A beat of silence. He was recalibrating. "Fine. Then you listen to me. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's over. You will call your bank, you will tell them you made a mistake, and you will release those funds today." It wasn't a request. It was an order. I was no longer a person to him. I was a disobedient appliance. I said nothing. My silence was a weapon he didn't know how to fight. Are you listening to me? He snapped, his voice cracking with frustration. You are contractually obligated to provide that money. We have a signed agreement with the hotel based on your pledge. There is no contract, Tyler, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. There was a gift, and I have rescinded it. That's when he broke. The mask of the charming, in-control fiancé shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the ugly, raw thing underneath was finally revealed. You are a bitter, manipulative old woman, he snarled, the words dripping with venom. You were never happy for us. You're just trying to control her, trying to keep her tied to you because you have nothing else in your pathetic life. You're trying to ruin her happiness. The insults were meant to wound, to find the soft spots of a lonely, aging mother's insecurities and press down, hard. And a month ago, they would have. They would have shattered me. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was a woman who had just been erased by her own daughter on a cold Tuesday morning. His words were just echoes of a truth I had already been forced to swallow. She sees it, you know, he continued, his voice rising. She sees how needy you are, how you use money to buy her love. I'm the one who taught her to be independent. I'm the one who is trying to save her from you. I held the phone away from my ear, looking at it as if it were a venomous snake. I could hear his muffled ranting continuing, a stream of poison flowing into the quiet interior of my car. I listened for another few seconds, letting the pure, unfiltered ugliness of his character wash over me. I wanted to remember it. I needed to. Then I ended the call. Click. I sat in the silence, my heart hammering against my ribs. The phone immediately lit up again. A voicemail from Emily, her voice thick with tears, a string of texts from Tyler, each one more vicious than the last. He called me a parasite. He threatened to tell everyone I was mentally unstable. He promised he would make sure I never saw Emily again. My phone was no longer a tool of communication. It was an instrument of assault. It buzzed and chimed relentlessly, a live grenade in my purse. And that's when the new Maggie, the woman born on that cold front porch, did something the old Maggie never would have. I didn't delete the messages. I didn't block their numbers. I started saving everything. My fingers, now completely steady, moved with a cold, methodical purpose. I took screenshots of Tyler's abusive texts, the timeline of his threats clear and damning. I saved Emily's tearful, manipulative voicemails, the ones where she blamed me for everything, the ones where she repeated his talking points like a catechism. I created a new folder in my photo gallery. I labeled it Evidence. I was no longer just a mother in pain. I was a documentarian. I was cataloging the precise nature of my own erasure. Each saved message was a brick. Each screenshot was a stone. I was building a fortress of truth, and I was building it out of the very words they were using to try and tear me down. When I was done, I had a small, neat, and utterly devastating collection of their true selves. Then, and only then, did I make my final call. I scrolled through my contacts, past the names of cousins and old friends, until I found the one I was looking for. A name I hadn't needed to call in years, but a name I had kept for this very reason. For the unthinkable. Andrew Collins, my attorney. He had handled the sale of my first house, drafted my will after my husband died, and had always given me the same piece of advice. Hope for the best, Maggie, but be prepared for the worst. He answered on the second ring, his voice the same as it had always been, calm, steady, and intelligent. Andrew Collins speaking. Andrew, I said, and I was surprised by the strength in my own voice. It was the voice of a client, not a victim. It's Maggie Reynolds. Maggie? It's been a while. How are you? I'm prepared for the worst, I said, the words coming out before I could even think them. There was a pause on his end. The friendly warmth was replaced by professional focus. I see, he said quietly. What's going on? I took a breath. I'm in Denver. I need to make some immediate and significant changes to my will and my entire estate plan. I need to protect my assets from what I believe is sustained financial and emotional abuse from my daughter and her fiancé. I laid it out for him. The money, the wedding, the exclusion, the phone calls, the threats. I was concise, factual, and I left out the heartbreak. He didn't need to hear about my pain. He needed to see the facts. He needed the receipts. When I was finished, the line was silent for a moment. "Maggie," he finally said, and his voice was grim. "You did the right thing by calling me." "And you absolutely did the right thing by freezing that transfer. Do not speak to them again. Do not answer their calls or texts. Let everything go to voicemail. We'll use all of it. Can you be in my office tomorrow morning, say 9 a.m.? "I'm in Denver, Andrew," I reminded him. "Your office is in Dallas." "Not anymore," he said. "I moved the main practice up here 2 years ago. I thought you knew. I'm downtown, in the Wellington Tower." A small, bitter smile touched my lips. Of course I didn't know. My world had become so small, so focused on Emily, that I had lost track of my own life. 9 a.m. sounds perfect, I said. We hung up. I dropped the phone back into my purse and finally let out the breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. The assault was over. The storm had passed. They had thrown their worst at me, and I was still standing. More than standing. I was fighting back. I had the voicemails, I had the threats, and now I had a lawyer. The love might have been a lie, but the receipts were forever. The decision was made in a split second, a gut reaction that bypassed thought and went straight to action. I was not going to a budget motel. For my entire adult life, my choices had been dictated by pragmatism and sacrifice. Every dollar was counted. Every expenditure weighed against the needs of my daughter. Vacations were weekend trips to a state park, not resorts. A new pair of shoes was a necessity, not a pleasure. The idea of spending money on myself, purely for my own comfort, was so foreign it felt like a different language. My default setting was economy, budget, make do. I had planned to find a cheap, anonymous motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with thin walls and the smell of industrial cleaner, a place to simply exist until my meeting with Andrew. But as I sat in my car, the phone silent in my purse, a fortress of damning evidence now secured, I felt a powerful, unfamiliar urge. It wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. The respect I had been denied at my daughter's door, the respect that had been shredded over the phone by a man who saw me as an obstacle. If they wouldn't give it to me, I would have to give it to myself. I typed "nicest hotel downtown Denver" into my phone's GPS. The first result was the Moncrief, a grand historic building of stone and glass that looked like something out of an old movie. The price per night that flashed on the screen made my stomach clench, a reflexive, ingrained response to what felt like a wild extravagance. The old Maggie would have recoiled, immediately searching for a more sensible option. The new Maggie put the car in gear and started driving. Pulling up to the valet was an act of defiance. A man in a crisp uniform opened my car door, the worn fabric of my driver's seat exposed to the opulent lobby beyond. For a moment, I felt a flash of insecurity. I was a 71-year-old woman in comfortable driving clothes, with a scuffed suitcase and a 10-year-old car, stepping into a world of polished marble and quiet money. I braced myself for the subtle, dismissive glance I had come to expect from places like this. It never came. "Welcome to the Moncrief," the valet said with a genuine smile. "Let me get that bag for you." At the front desk, a young woman with a warm, professional demeanor looked at me. "Checking in?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'd like a room, a suite, if you have one available, with a view." If she was surprised, she didn't show it. She just tapped a few keys on her computer. "Of course, we have a lovely junior suite on the 14th floor, overlooking the city. Will that work for you?" "That will be perfect," I said. I handed her my credit card, the one I used for emergencies. This, I decided, was the definition of an emergency. She swiped it, handed me my key cards, and then looked me in the eye. "Enjoy your stay with us, Ms. Reynolds," she said. Ms. Reynolds. The name, spoken with such casual, professional respect, landed in my soul like a cool drink of water on a parched day. At my daughter's house, I was Mom, a title that had become synonymous with ATM. To Tyler, I was Maggie, a name he spat like an insult. Here in this palace of quiet luxury, I was a person. I was Ms. Reynolds, a guest to be welcomed, a client to be served. It was a simple courtesy, but it felt like a profound validation. The suite was beautiful. It was larger than the first apartment I had paid for Emily to rent. A sitting area with a velvet couch, a desk overlooking the city lights that were just beginning to flicker on, and a king-sized bed with a mountain of pillows that looked like a soft white cloud. The bathroom was all marble and chrome, with a deep soaking tub and a stack of fluffy white towels. I dropped my purse on the desk and walked to the window. The city spread out below me, a glittering tapestry of life and movement. Cars flowed like rivers of light along the streets. Windows in distant skyscrapers glowed. Down there, somewhere in that sprawling metropolis, were my daughter and her fiancé. They were probably in a crisis meeting, frantically trying to figure out their next move. They were probably angry. They were probably scared. I felt nothing, not happiness at their predicament, not a vindictive thrill, just a vast, quiet distance. They were a problem happening in another city, to other people. Up here, on the 14th floor, in my self-respect suite, they couldn't touch me. I ordered room service, a steak, medium rare, with a glass of expensive red wine, another small act of rebellion. I never ordered steak. It was an indulgence. Tonight, my entire life felt like an indulgence. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, not because I was hungry, but because I could. Because for the first time in a very, very long time, I was the one being served. After dinner, I ran a bath, pouring in the fragrant salts the hotel provided. As I soaked in the steaming water, the tension I had been carrying in my shoulders for years began to melt away. The exhaustion of the 800-mile drive, compounded by the emotional devastation of the morning, finally settled deep into my bones. But sleep was still a long way off. My mind was buzzing, replaying the day's events, sorting through the wreckage. I put on the thick, plush robe the hotel provided, feeling the soft terry cloth against my skin. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady now. I wasn't looking for messages from them. I knew Andrew had advised against it, and I was content to let their frantic pleas and threats pile up, unheard, in the digital ether. I did something else, something the old Maggie, the trusting, hopeful mother, would never have done. I opened Instagram, then Facebook. I typed Emily's name into the search bar. Her profile was a shrine to the life I had funded. Every photo was perfectly staged, filtered, and curated to project an image of effortless success and blissful love. There was the picture of the engagement ring, a diamond far too large for their actual budget, held up against a backdrop of mountains. "I said yes to my soulmate," the caption read. No mention of the mother who had paid off her credit card debt a month before so she could have a clean slate. There was the photo of her in the wedding dress. She was standing in a high-end bridal boutique, surrounded by smiling bridesmaids, a vision in white lace. "Found the one! Can't wait to be Mrs. Brooks!" No mention of the mother who had wired the $5,000 deposit for the dress from her meager savings account. I scrolled further, my thumb moving methodically. Post after post chronicled their perfect life, a weekend trip to a vineyard, a lavish birthday dinner for Tyler at a steakhouse, a new set of designer luggage for the honeymoon they had planned to Fiji, a honeymoon that, I now realized with a sickening lurch, was also being paid for with my money, my retirement, my future. In all of it, in the dozens of photos celebrating their journey to the altar, there was not a single picture of me, not one. I was not just excluded from the ceremony, I had been scrubbed from the entire narrative. I was the ghostwriter of her life story, and my name wasn't even in the acknowledgments. Then I saw it, a post from 3 weeks ago. It was a picture of her and Tyler, their faces close together, smiling that same curated smile for the camera. The caption was a long, gushing tribute to him. It was full of phrases like, my rock, my biggest supporter, and the man who taught me what true strength is. But it was the last line that stopped my heart. I'm so grateful for a partner who isn't afraid to challenge me and who helped me find the courage to finally cut the chains of codependency. Independence, hatch, true love, future is bright. Cut the chains. The words were a physical blow. The chain he was talking about was me. My love, my support, my lifetime of sacrifice. He had reframed all of it as a form of bondage. My help was not a gift. It was a weakness. My love was not a foundation. It was a cage. And he, the valiant hero, had arrived just in time to give her the key. I stared at the screen, the cheerful, smiling photo mocking me. The raw, ugly truth of my situation was laid bare in a hashtag. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was a complete and total rewriting of our history. He wasn't just isolating her from me in the present. He was poisoning the past, turning every act of love I had ever shown into an act of toxic control in her memory. I clicked off the phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. The anger I felt was a clean, white-hot flame. It burned away the last vestiges of my grief, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. They thought I was a chain. They thought my love was a prison. They had no idea what a real fight looked like. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They had mistaken my silence for consent. I had been fighting with love my whole life. A quiet, sacrificial, endless kind of love. Now I would learn to fight with something else. I would fight with boundaries. I would fight with consequences. And I would fight with the cold, unvarnished, and heavily documented truth. He wanted to talk about chains? Fine. I was about to show him what it felt like when the bank that holds all the keys decides to change the locks. I turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness, save for the glittering city lights outside my window. For the first time all day, my mind was quiet. The war had been declared, and tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I was meeting with my general. I slept. I didn't think I would, but after the white-hot anger of the discovery faded, a profound exhaustion took its place. I fell into the soft white cloud of the hotel bed, and sleep came like a tide, pulling me under into a deep, dreamless dark. It was the dreamless, heavy sleep of a soldier the night before a battle. My body knew it needed to gather its strength. When I woke, the sun was just beginning to touch the tops of the tallest buildings, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gray. I didn't feel rested, not in the traditional sense. I felt reset. The emotional storm of the previous day had passed, scouring me clean. The grief, the shock, the betrayal, they were all still there, but they were no longer a chaotic whirlwind inside me. They had settled into a hard, dense weight in the pit of my stomach. It was the weight of resolve. I showered, the hot water a welcome shock to my system. As I dressed, I chose my clothes with a new sense of purpose. Not the comfortable, sensible clothes of Maggie the mom, but the clothes of Ms. Reynolds, a woman on her way to a meeting with her attorney. A classic black trouser, a simple silk blouse, and the small gold watch my husband had given me for our 10th anniversary. It was a watch that said quiet competence. It was a watch that said, I am not to be trifled with. I didn't check my phone. I knew it would be a minefield of emotional manipulation and vitriol. Let them scream into the void. Their words had no power over me anymore. They were just data points, more entries for the folder labeled evidence. Andrew's office was on the 30th floor of the Wellington Tower, a sleek, modern building of steel and glass that felt a world away from my quiet life in Dallas. The lobby was hushed and intimidating, but as I stepped out of the elevator into the offices of Collins and Associates, I felt a sense of calm. This was a place of order, of rules, of consequences. This was the world where hashtags and emotional blackmail meant nothing, and signed documents meant everything. Andrew greeted me himself at the door to the conference room. He was older now, his hair more silver than I remembered, but his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and kind. He didn't hug me or offer any effusive sympathies. He just gave my hand a firm, reassuring squeeze. "Maggie," he said, his voice calm and serious. "I'm glad you're here. Coffee?" "Please," I said. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect. A long, polished mahogany table, a wall of windows with a panoramic view of the city, and a palpable sense of gravity. This was where important decisions were made. This was where futures were rewritten. Once we were settled with our coffee, he didn't waste any time with small talk. He slid a legal pad into the center of the table. "Okay," he began, his pen poised. "Tell me everything again. From the beginning. Every detail you can remember, no matter how small you think it is." And so I did. I walked him through the last 2 years, from Tyler's first appearance to the slow, methodical isolation, the constant talk of independence, the pressure for the wedding money. I told him about the front porch, the word allocated, the phrase, just immediate family. I told him about the phone calls, the demands, the insults. And then I told him about the Instagram post, about the phrase that had burned itself into my memory. "Cut the chains of codependency." As I spoke, he listened. He didn't interrupt. He just made notes, his pen scratching quietly on the pad. His expression never changed, but I could see a muscle tightening in his jaw. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair and was silent for a full minute, his gaze fixed on the notes he had taken. "This isn't just a case of a spoiled child and a manipulative fiancé, Maggie," he said finally, his voice low and grim. "This is a classic pattern of elder abuse, specifically financial exploitation and undue influence. They weren't just asking for a gift. They were systematically dismantling your financial security and emotional autonomy for their own gain." The words hit me hard. Elder abuse, exploitation. It was a label I had never thought to apply to myself. That happened to other people, to frail, confused old women, not to me. But hearing Andrew say it, hearing the cold, legal definition of my experience, I knew it was true. I hadn't been a loving, overly generous mother. I had been a target. "The Instagram post is the smoking gun," he continued, tapping his pen on the pad. "He's not just influencing her. He's creating a public narrative to justify his actions. He's painting you as the unstable, controlling mother, so that when he finally takes control of your finances, which was clearly the end game here, it looks like a heroic act of rescue, not a hostile takeover." My blood ran cold. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. The $63,000 wasn't the end. It was the beginning. It was the proof of concept. Once they had that, they would have come for the house, the investments, everything. My signature on a piece of paper, my mind clouded by what they would have framed as my own codependency and instability, was all they would have needed. "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Andrew leaned forward, and his expression shifted. The grim analyst was gone, replaced by a strategic commander. "We do 2 things simultaneously. First, we build an impregnable defense. Second, we rewrite the rules of the game entirely." He picked up a thick file folder from the table. "This is a copy of your current will and estate plan. As it stands, Emily is your sole heir. She inherits everything, unconditionally. The house in Dallas, your investment portfolio, your savings, everything." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "Today, we are going to tear this up and start from scratch." For the next 2 hours, we performed open-heart surgery on my life. Andrew was the lead surgeon, and I was his active, engaged assistant. We went through every asset, every account, every policy. First, the will. "We're creating what's called a revocable living trust," Andrew explained. "You will be the trustee for as long as you live. You control everything. Upon your death, a successor trustee, someone you appoint, who is not Emily, will take over." We chose my younger brother, a retired accountant living in Florida, a man who was meticulous, fair, and immune to Emily's charms. "Now for the terms of the trust," Andrew continued. "Emily will still be the beneficiary, But her inheritance will no longer be unconditional. It will come with strings, strong ones. He laid out the new stakes, and I felt a sense of power I hadn't realized I'd lost. The house in Dallas would not go to her directly. It would remain in the trust, and she would be given the right to live in it, provided she paid the taxes and upkeep. She could never sell it or use it as collateral for a loan. It was a home, not a cash machine. The rest of the inheritance, the liquid assets, would be distributed in increments, tied to specific life milestones. A portion upon her 40th birthday, another upon her 50th. But the most important clause, the one Andrew called the respect clause, was the true masterstroke. The successor trustee, he explained, will have full discretion to halt all distributions if, in his judgment, Emily is in a relationship that is deemed to be coercive, abusive, or financially exploitive. Furthermore, any attempt to contest the terms of this trust will result in her immediate and permanent disinheritance. It was a fortress. It was a legal and financial wall so high and so thick that no predator, no matter how charming, could ever breach it. I was protecting my daughter not just from Tyler, but from her own worst instincts, from the pattern of dependency he had so expertly cultivated. I was protecting her from her future self. As Andrew dictated the new terms to his paralegal over the phone, a strange sense of peace settled over me. This wasn't an act of revenge. It wasn't about punishing Emily. It was an act of profound, responsible, and clear-eyed love. The kind of love that says, I will not help you destroy yourself. The kind of love that has boundaries made of steel. My love was no longer going to be a blank check. It was going to be a blueprint for a healthier life, whether she wanted it or not. With the estate plan completely overhauled and the new documents being drafted for my signature, Andrew turned to the immediate problem. The frozen funds are secure, he said. They won't be able to touch them, but they will escalate. When the threats and manipulation don't work, they'll try other tactics. We need to be prepared. I slid my phone across the table. I saved everything. He spent the next 20 minutes scrolling through the screenshots and listening to the voicemails, his face a mask of stone. When he was done, he looked up at me, and there was a fire in his eyes. Good, he said, his voice tight. This is our shield. If they try to take you to court, if they try to claim you are mentally incompetent, if they try to paint you as the villain, we show them this. We show a judge the clear, documented pattern of coercion and abuse. They won't have a leg to stand on. He slid the phone back to me. Go back to your hotel, Maggie. Rest. You've done the hard part. The documents will be ready for you to sign this afternoon. From this moment on, you are in a position of absolute strength. Access to anything you've built, your money, your legacy, your love, now comes with a new price tag. What's that? I asked. He gave me a small, grim smile. Respect, and a zero-tolerance policy for abuse. The game has changed, and they don't even know they're playing a new one yet. I walked out of that office feeling taller than when I had walked in. The weight in my stomach was still there, but it wasn't the weight of resolve anymore. It was the weight of power, the power to protect myself, the power to define the terms of my own life, and the quiet, unshakable power of a mother who had finally learned that the most loving word she could say was no. I returned to the hotel feeling like a different woman than the one who had left that morning. I had walked into Andrew's office carrying the fractured pieces of my life. I walked out carrying a blueprint. The world outside the taxi window looked the same bustling streets, the same indifferent crowds, but my place in it had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer a victim of circumstances. I was the architect of them. Back in the suite, the silence felt different. It was no longer the empty silence of loneliness. It was the charged, powerful silence of a command center. I signed the documents Andrew's courier delivered, my signature a firm, decisive stroke. Each letter I formed was a nail in the coffin of the old order. The revocable trust, the new will, the respect clause. They were no longer abstract legal concepts. They were the new laws of my universe. I knew she would come. The voicemails and texts had likely stopped not out of respect, but out of a change in strategy. When the frontal assault of anger and threats had failed to breach my defenses, Tyler would have sent in his emissary, the one he believed was my single exploitable weakness, my daughter. The call from the front desk came just after 4 p.m. "Ms. Reynolds," the polite professional voice of the concierge said, "a Ms. Emily Brooks is in the lobby to see you. Should I send her up?" The formality was a shield. Ms. Reynolds, Ms. Emily Brooks. We were two separate entities, no longer the assumed unit of mother and daughter. "Yes," I said, my voice even. "Send her up." I didn't pace. I didn't wring my hands. I stood by the large window, looking down at the city, my hands clasped loosely behind my back. I was in my territory now. This suite, paid for with my money, was my ground. The battle would be fought here, on my terms. I listened to the quiet hum of the hotel, the distant sound of the elevator bell. Each sound was a tick of the clock, counting down to the moment the old world met the new one. The knock on the door was soft, tentative. A stark contrast to the confident, dismissive way they had stood in their own doorway just yesterday morning. The tables had turned. I opened the door. She looked terrible. The confident, curated glow of her social media presence was gone, replaced by a pale, drawn exhaustion. Her eyes were puffy and red-rimmed, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. She was wearing yesterday's clothes. For a flash of a second, the mother in me, the fixer, felt a pang of pity. I wanted to smooth the stray hairs from her forehead and tell her everything would be okay. But I was not here to fix this. I was here to end it. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her face crumpled, and she lunged forward, her arms outstretched for a hug. It was the move, the one that had always worked. The tearful embrace that signaled the end of any conflict, the one that melted my resolve and made me forget whatever hurt had come before. It was a physical act of absolution, and she was seeking it automatically. My hand came up, my palm facing her, not aggressively, but with an undeniable finality. A stop sign. I took a half step back. The space between us, the few feet of empty air, became a chasm. Her arms, which had been reaching for me, fell awkwardly to her sides. Confusion, then a deep, wounded shock, flickered in her eyes. It was the first time in her life I had ever refused her a physical comfort. "We're not there yet, Emily," I said, my voice quiet, but leaving no room for argument. "Come in." I stepped aside, holding the door open. She walked past me into the room, looking small and lost in the vast, impersonal luxury of the suite. She drifted towards the center of the room, her arms wrapped around her waist again, a gesture of self-protection. I closed the door, the soft click echoing in the room. I didn't sit down. I remained standing, a few feet away from her. This was not a conversation between a mother and daughter in a living room. This was a meeting. "Why are you here, Emily?" I asked. She stammered, looking around the room as if the answer might be written on the walls. "I came to talk, to fix this. Mom, this has gone too far. He's losing his mind. The hotel is threatening to cancel everything." "This isn't about Tyler," I said, "and it's not about the hotel. This is about you and me. This is about the truth. So let's talk about that." I let the silence stretch, forcing her to look at me. Her gaze was unsteady, skittering away every time it met mine. "Let me ask you a few questions," I said, my voice still calm, almost conversational. "And I want you to answer them honestly, not with the words Tyler gave you, but with your own." She swallowed hard, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Who paid for your college education, Emily? The degree that got you your first job?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down at the plush carpet. "You did," she mumbled, the words barely audible. "That's right," I said, my voice unwavering. "And your first apartment, the one in Capitol Hill with the yellow walls. Who paid the security deposit and the first 2 months' rent so you could get on your feet?" Silence. Then a smaller, more defeated whisper. "You did." "And the car," I continued, each question a steady, deliberate step. "The reliable Toyota you still drive to work every day. Who bought that for you so you wouldn't have to worry about breaking down on the highway?" Her shoulders slumped. She wouldn't look at me. You did, Mom. Yes, I did, I said, and now a thread of steel entered my voice. I did all of those things. I refinanced my house. I sold my car. I took double shifts until my feet bled. I built your entire adult life piece by piece out of my own sacrifice. And this wedding, the $63,000 production you didn't see fit to invite me to, who paid for that? A single tear rolled down her cheek and dripped onto her shirt. She didn't answer. She couldn't. I paid for it, I said, answering for her. I paid for it with my future, with my peace of mind, with the last dollar I had saved for my own old age. I gave you everything. And in return, you stood on your front porch and looked at me like a stranger. The tears were coming freely now, silent drops of shame. It wasn't like that, she whispered. Don't, I said, the words sharp and sudden. Don't you dare lie to me. Not anymore. Not in this room. I took a step closer. This is his language, isn't it? This whole performance. He told you my love was a chain. He told you my help was codependency. He told you I was a manipulative, needy old woman, and that he was the hero saving you from me. He built a wall between us, brick by brick, and he had the audacity to call it independence. Her breath hitched in a sob. She knew. She knew I was speaking the truth. I wasn't finished. This was the hardest part. The part where the blame had to land where it belonged. And you let him, I said, my voice dropping, each word heavy with the weight of years of silent complicity. You stood there and watched him do it. Your silence was your consent, Emily. Every time you were too busy to call me back, every time you repeated one of his condescending little phrases about standing on your own 2 feet, you were handing him another brick. Every time he insulted me behind my back, and you didn't defend me, you were mixing the mortar. You didn't just let him build that wall, you helped him. She finally looked at me, her face a mask of misery. I love him, she choked out, as if that explained everything. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. The pity I felt was overwhelmed by a profound, heartbreaking clarity. You don't love him. You are terrified of him. You're terrified of being alone. You're terrified of his disapproval. What you call love is just a profound lack of self-respect. He saw that in you from the very beginning. He saw the empty space where your own strength was supposed to be, and he filled it with himself. The truth was finally in the room with us. It was a harsh, ugly, and undeniable thing. It sat in the space between us, in the space where a hug was supposed to be. For years, I had protected her from truths like this. I had fixed things so she would never have to face the consequences of her own choices. But the fixer was gone. All that was left was a mother holding up a mirror, and for the first time, I was not going to let her look away. So you can stop crying now, Emily, I said, my voice softening, not with pity, but with a sad finality. Your tears don't work here anymore. The only thing that works in this room is the truth. And the truth is, you broke my heart long before you closed that door in my face yesterday. The command to stop crying had the opposite effect. A raw, ragged sob tore from her throat, the kind of sound a wounded animal makes. She sank onto the edge of the pristine velvet couch as if her legs could no longer support her, burying her face in her hands. The perfectly constructed facade of the bride-to-be, the successful young professional, had crumbled, leaving behind a lost, weeping girl in a room that was too big and too quiet. I watched her, my own heart a leaden weight in my chest. There was a part of me, a deep, primal instinct, that wanted to go to her, to sit beside her and stroke her hair and absorb her pain into myself. That was the dance we had always done. She would break and I would mend. But I held my ground. I stood, unmoving, letting her grief fill the space between us. This was a pain she had to feel. This was a wound I could not and would not fix for her. He said you needed me, she choked out from behind her hands, the words garbled by tears. He said that all the money, the help, it was because you were lonely, because you had no one else. He said you were using it to keep me close, to make sure I would never leave you, that I was all you had. The myth, the central lie upon which their entire campaign had been built. It was so insidious, so perfectly designed to prey on a daughter's guilt and a mother's deepest fear. He had painted me as a pathetic, needy creature, clinging to her only child out of desperation. He had twisted my generosity into a symptom of my own emptiness. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. I walked over to the desk where I had left my purse. I didn't say a word. I took out my phone, my movements slow and deliberate. Her sobs began to subside, replaced by ragged, hitching breaths as she watched me, her eyes wide and fearful, wondering what was coming next. I unlocked the phone and tapped on the icon for my bank's mobile app. The familiar logo appeared, followed by a request for my fingerprint. I pressed my thumb to the screen. The app opened, displaying the main dashboard. A list of accounts, a series of numbers. I turned the phone around and held it out to her. "Read it, Emily," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Read it out loud." She stared at the screen, her brow furrowed in confusion. Through her tears, she squinted at the small text. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's my life," I said. "The one you and Tyler know nothing about. Read it." She took a shaky breath and began to read, her voice a hesitant murmur. "Consolidated trust, checking, $17,428. Her voice faltered. That number alone was more than she likely thought I had to my name, especially after the wedding transfer. "Keep going," I said. "High-yield savings, $92,150. She whispered, the number barely audible. "Louder, Emily." "Investment portfolio, Reynolds Trust, $463,000. She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes darted from the phone screen to my face and back again, wide with disbelief. "There's more," I said, my voice relentless. "Scroll down." Her trembling finger swiped up, revealing 2 more accounts. Rental property account, Dallas Unit 1, monthly income, $2,100. Rental property account, Dallas Unit 2, monthly income, $2,400. She dropped her hand, the phone still held out in front of her like a strange alien artifact. She was staring at the screen, but I knew she wasn't seeing the numbers anymore. She was seeing the collapse of a fundamental truth she had been fed for 2 years. The myth of the needy, dependent mother was evaporating in the harsh, undeniable light of a bank statement. "The house in Dallas is paid off, Emily," I said, my voice as calm and factual as a news report. "The mortgage was paid in full 7 years ago. The 2 rental properties I bought with the equity from that house generate a steady, reliable income. My husband's life insurance, which I never touched, became the seed for that investment portfolio, which Andrew has managed for me for the last 20 years. That $92,000 in savings? That was my travel fund. I was planning a trip to Italy next spring." I took the phone from her hand and turned it off, the screen going dark. "The $63,000 I gave you for your wedding was not my last dime. It was not my retirement. It was a significant, painful, and foolish withdrawal from my life's work. It was a gift I gave because I loved you, and because I was a fool who refused to see the truth. But it was not an act of desperation. It was a choice." I let that sink in. I watched her mind trying to reconcile the image of the pathetic, lonely woman from Tyler's narrative with the financially secure, independent person who was standing before her. "I am not needy, Emily," I said, and the words felt like a declaration of independence I didn't know I'd been waiting to make. "I have a life. I have friends. I have my own interests. I have my own money. I have a future that has absolutely nothing to do with you or your husband." I leaned against the desk, crossing my arms. "But you know who is needy? You are." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and brutal. "Think about it," I pressed on, my voice softening slightly, not with pity, but with the cold sadness of the truth. "When was the last time you called me just to see how I was? When was the last time you asked about my life, my friends, my plans? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't, at its core, about something you needed from me?" Her face, which had been a mask of shock, now crumpled with the dawning of a new, more painful understanding. She was replaying the last 2 years in her mind, re-examining her own behavior through this new lens. "Your car breaks down," I continued, ticking the points off on my fingers. "Who do you call?" "Me." "You have a fight with a friend." "Who do you call?" "Me." "You need advice on your resume." "You need someone to proofread an email to your boss." "You need $500 to cover a bill until your next paycheck." "Who do you call, Emily?" She just shook her head, tears of a different kind now streaming down her face. These were not the tears of frustration or manipulation. They were the tears of self-recognition. "You don't call me to share your life," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You call me for favors. You call me for support. You call me for solutions. I haven't been your mother for the last 2 years. I've been your assistant, your therapist, your bank. And the moment I stopped performing those functions, the moment I drew a single, simple boundary for my own self-respect, you and the man you love decided I was worthless." She finally spoke, her voice thick and choked with a shame so profound it was painful to watch. "I didn't see it," she whispered. I didn't see it. He made it all make sense. He said it was what strong people do. They build their own lives. They don't rely on their parents." "Independence, Emily," I said, nodding slowly, "is standing on your own 2 feet. It's paying your own bills. It's solving your own problems. It is not, and has never been, about amputating the people who love you. That isn't independence. That's isolation. And a man who isolates you is not trying to build you up. He is trying to control you. He needed you to believe I was a chain so that you would never see the cage he was building around you." I walked back to the window, turning my back on her, giving her a moment to absorb the full weight of what had just been revealed. The city lights were a brilliant, indifferent constellation below. "He told you that you were building a new, independent life," I said to the glass. "But what have you actually been doing? You've just been leaning on a different person. You traded a mother who would do anything for you for a man who will do anything to you to get what he wants. You haven't been independent for a single day. You've just been transferred." The silence that followed was the most profound of all. It was the silence of a life being reevaluated. It was the silence of a myth not just being unmasked, but being utterly and completely annihilated. She hadn't just been complicit in my erasure, she had been a victim of her own. She was so desperate to be seen as a strong, independent woman that she had allowed a predator to define for her what that meant. And his definition required only one thing: my complete and total removal from her life. When I finally turned back to her, the tears had stopped. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but for the first time since I had arrived in Denver, she was looking at me, really looking at me. And in her eyes, I saw not just the end of a lie, but the terrifying, fragile, and absolutely necessary beginning of the truth. The hollow look in her eyes was a terrifying and beautiful thing to behold. It was the look of a person standing in the rubble of a house they had just realized was a prison. The foundations of her reality, her relationship, her self-perception, her understanding of our history had been pulverized in the span of an afternoon. She was adrift, the narrative that had guided her for the last 2 years revealed as a fiction. She didn't speak for a long time. The silence in the suite was no longer tense or confrontational. It was heavy with the weight of unspoken questions, a vacuum waiting to be filled. I let it stretch. This was her silence to break. I had laid the facts on the table, a cold, hard feast of truth. Now she had to choose whether to partake. What do I do?" she finally whispered, the question directed at the floor. It was the question she had been asking me her entire life in one form or another. What do I do about the mean girl at school? What do I do about my college application? What do I do when my boss is unfair? The fixer. She was still looking for the fixer, and for the last time in my life, I refused to give her the answer. "That is the wrong question, Emily," I said, my voice gentle but firm. The question is not, what do I do? The question is, what do I believe? And that is a question only you can answer. I can't answer it for you. Tyler can't answer it for you. You have to answer it for yourself. I walked over and sat in the armchair opposite the couch where she was perched, creating a deliberate, formal distance between us. You have two stories in front of you now, I continued. Two completely different versions of reality. In one version told by Tyler, your mother is a needy, manipulative, lonely old woman who uses her money to control you, and he is the hero who is liberating you into a life of strength and independence. I paused, letting the familiar, poisonous narrative hang in the air. In the other version, I said, my gaze steady on hers, your mother is a financially secure, independent woman who loves you, but who has been systematically alienated and exploited by a man who is a classic emotional abuser. A man who reframes love as control, who isolates his partner from her support system, and who sees her family not as a resource of love, but as a financial resource to be drained. I leaned forward slightly. One of those stories is a lie, Emily, and one of them is the truth. You are standing at a crossroads, and you have to decide right now which path you are going to walk down. You can no longer have a foot on both. She shook her head, a gesture of pure, overwhelmed confusion. But I love him, she repeated, the phrase now sounding less like a declaration and more like a question. Do you? I asked, my voice devoid of judgment. What does that love look like? Does it look like a partner who encourages you to have a close, healthy relationship with your family? Or does it look like a partner who constantly criticizes the person who raised you? Does love look like celebrating your mother's generosity? Or does it look like creating a public narrative that she is a chain that needs to be cut? She flinched as if I had struck her. She hadn't known that I'd seen the post. Does love look like a man who respects your history? I pressed on. Or a man who systematically tries to erase it? Does love protect you? Or does it isolate you? These are not difficult questions, Emily, but you have been expertly trained not to ask them. The color was draining from her face as she connected the dots, applying my questions to the 1,000 small compromises and justifications she had made over the last 2 years. Every time she had let a cruel remark about me slide, every time she had adopted his dismissive tone, every time she had chosen his version of events over her own memories, it was all coalescing into a single, horrifying pattern. You have a choice to make, I said, bringing the point home. And it's not about me. It's not about choosing between me and Tyler. This is about choosing between the truth and a lie. It's about choosing a life of respect. Respect for me, but more importantly, respect for yourself, or a life of continued complicity in your own emotional and financial destruction. I stood up. The meeting was coming to an end. I am going to give you 24 hours, I said, the words clear and precise. One day. By this time tomorrow, you need to have made your decision. You can choose to continue down the path with Tyler, to believe his story, to proceed with this wedding built on a foundation of lies and my stolen future. If you make that choice, that's fine. But you will do it without me. And I don't just mean without my money, I mean without me. I will walk out of your life. I will change my phone number. The trust Andrew and I created this morning will be your only connection to me, and it is designed to protect my legacy from men like him and from the woman you will have become. We will be, for all intents and purposes, strangers. The finality in my voice was absolute. This was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, a boundary carved in granite. Or, I continued, my voice softening just a fraction, you can choose the truth. You can choose to walk away from this performance. You can choose to start building a life based on honesty and self-respect. If you choose that path, I will be there. Not to fix it for you, not to tell you what to do, but to support you as you learn to stand on your own 2 feet for the first time in your life. The choice is yours, entirely. I walked to the door of the suite and opened it. You should go now. You have a lot to think about. She stood up on shaky legs, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask of shock. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, searching for a lifeline, a hint, a telltale sign that this was just a bluff. She found none. All she found was the calm, steady gaze of a woman who had drawn a line and was fully prepared to stand behind it, no matter the cost. She walked out of the room without another word. I closed the door behind her, and the moment the latch clicked, I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my own legs suddenly feeling weak. I had done it. I had placed the full weight of the future on her shoulders. I had given my daughter the most terrifying gift a parent can give, the absolute freedom to choose, and the absolute responsibility for the consequences. The next few hours were the longest of my life. I didn't eat. I didn't watch TV. I sat in the armchair, watching the sky outside my window turn from the deep blue of twilight to the inky black of night. My phone remained silent on the desk. My part in this was over. The ball was in her court. The call came just after 10 p.m. It wasn't her. It was Tyler. I looked at his name on the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it. My lawyer had told me not to speak to him, but this was different. This was not an assault. This was a negotiation. He was feeling the ground shift, and he was trying to regain control. I needed to know what his next move was. I answered, putting the phone on speaker. "Maggie," he said. His voice was completely different. The anger and insults from yesterday were gone, replaced by a smooth, conciliatory tone. It was the voice of a man trying to close a difficult deal. "I'm glad I reached you. Emily is very upset. I think you were a little hard on her today." I said nothing. "Look," he continued, filling the silence. "I think we all just got off on the wrong foot here. Nerves are frayed, it's the week of the wedding. We all said things we didn't mean. I want to make this right." He was trying to reset the narrative, to frame my stand as an emotional outburst, a simple misunderstanding that could be smoothed over. "What's done is done, Tyler," I said, my voice cold. No, it doesn't have to be," he said quickly. "I've been thinking. You're right. We were thoughtless about the ceremony. It was a logistical oversight. We want to fix it. We want to offer you a special seat, right in the front row. And I'd be honored if you would walk Emily down the aisle with me. A place of honor for the mother of the bride." The offer was so transparently manipulative it was almost laughable. The crumbs. He was offering me crumbs from the table I had paid for, a special seat at the event from which I had been completely excluded. He thought my love, my respect, my very presence was a commodity that could be bargained for. He was trying to buy me off, to placate me with a token gesture so I would release the funds and let the show go on. "My presence is not for sale, Tyler," I said, my voice flat. He sighed, a faint hint of his earlier frustration creeping back in. "Maggie, be reasonable. What is it you want? Just tell me what you want, and we'll make it happen. You want a special mention in the program? You want to give a toast at the reception? Name your price." That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that he would never understand. He couldn't. His entire world was transactional. Everything and everyone had a price. He saw my actions not as a stand for dignity, but as a hardball negotiation tactic. He thought I was holding out for a better deal. "I am not a vendor you are negotiating with, Tyler," I said, the words sharp and clear. "I am the woman whose life savings you tried to steal to fund this fantasy. I am the woman you and my daughter planned to discard the moment the check cleared. What I want is something you are utterly incapable of giving. Respect. Sincere, unadulterated respect." I let that hang in the air for a moment. I have given Emily 24 hours to make a choice. That deadline has not changed. Your bargaining has no place here. This is not your deal to close. I could hear his sharp intake of breath, the sound of his control finally snapping. "You're making a mistake," he hissed, the smooth negotiator vanishing, replaced by the cornered animal from the day before. "You're going to regret this. You're going to end up a lonely old woman with nothing but your money." "No, Tyler," I said, and a small, sad smile touched my lips. "I'm going to end up a free woman with her self-respect. There's a difference." I ended the call before he could respond. Click. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights glittered below, a million separate lives moving in the darkness. Down there, my daughter was facing the most important choice of her life, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I could live with either outcome. I would be devastated to lose her, but I would not be destroyed. Because I had finally, after 71 years, chosen myself. I had refused the crumbs, and in doing so, I had reclaimed the entire banquet. The night was a long, silent vigil. I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair, the city lights my only companion, and I waited. The 24-hour clock was ticking, each silent second a testament to the new world I had created. I was not waiting in anguish. I was not waiting in fear. I was waiting in a state of quiet, profound clarity. I had drawn my line in the sand, and the tide was now coming in. By morning, I would know what, if anything, remained. Sometime after midnight, a knock came at the door. It was so soft I almost thought I had imagined it. It was not the confident knock of room service or the formal rap of hotel staff. It was a hesitant, fragile sound, the sound of someone who wasn't sure they had the right to be there. I knew before I even opened it who it was. I unlatched the door and pulled it open. Emily stood in the hallway, a solitary figure under the muted lighting. She was alone. She clutched a small overnight bag in one hand, her knuckles white. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, stripped of the polished armor of the bride-to-be, the confident professional, the woman who had it all figured out. She just looked lost. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw none of the pleading or the panic from the day before. I saw only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, and something else I hadn't seen in a very long time, a flicker of her true self. I didn't speak. I just stepped back, holding the door open. She walked past me into the suite, the same way she had that afternoon, but this time it was different. She wasn't an emissary sent by the enemy. She was a refugee seeking asylum. She dropped her bag by the door and walked to the far side of the room, standing by the vast window, the same spot where I had stood for so many hours. She stared out at the glittering city below, her back to me. "He told me you called," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. "He did," I confirmed. "He told me he offered you a place of honor, that he tried to make peace and you threw it back in his face." Her voice was still a monotone, but I could hear the faint tremor beneath the surface. "He said you were being irrational, that you were trying to punish us." I waited. This was her story to tell. I would not guide it. "When I got back to the house, he was different," she continued, her gaze still fixed on the city lights. The anger was gone. "He was charming. The man I fell in love with. He said he understood why I was upset. He said you had gotten into my head. He made dinner. He opened a bottle of wine. He told me how much he loved me, how we were a team, how we would get through this together." She was describing the cycle, the classic textbook pattern of the abuser. First comes the explosion of rage. Then, when that fails, comes the remorse, the charm, the manipulation. The honeymoon phase, designed to repair the damage and pull the victim back in before they have a chance to escape. "He started talking about the future," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Our future. The house we would buy after the wedding. The kids we would have. He painted this beautiful picture. And for a minute, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was all just a horrible misunderstanding, just like he said." She finally turned from the window to face me. The city lights cast a halo around her silhouette. "But this time, it was different. I couldn't unhear what you said. I couldn't unsee what you showed me on your phone." She took a shaky breath. "While he was talking about our future, I just kept thinking about my past. I kept thinking about you, about the yellow walls in my first apartment, about the day you showed up with that used Toyota and the giant red bow you'd stuck on the hood. I kept thinking about all the things I had forgotten, or the things he had taught me to forget." This was it. The crack in the foundation of his narrative was beginning to spread. He started to get frustrated when he saw I wasn't buying it, she said, her voice gaining a little more strength. The charm started to wear off. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him. I told him I was confused. I told him that maybe you had a point. She hugged her arms around herself, as if a chill had just passed through the room. His whole face changed. The smile just vanished. It was like a mask fell off. He stood up and he started to pace. He told me I was being weak, that I was letting my codependent mother poison our relationship. He said he had worked so hard to help me become a strong, independent woman, and now I was letting you drag me back down. She looked me right in the eye, and what I saw there was the dawning of a horrifying clarity. And then he said something that made everything else just click into place. He said, "After all I've done to separate you from her influence, you're just going to throw it all away?" To separate you from her influence. He had admitted it. In his anger, in his frustration at losing control, he had admitted that the isolation was not a byproduct of her independence. It was the entire goal. "It wasn't about my strength, was it?" she asked, the question a raw, open wound. "It was never about me becoming independent. It was about me becoming dependent on him." "Yes," I said softly. It was the only word that was needed. The floodgates opened, but this time, it wasn't the manipulative tears from the afternoon. It was a torrent of quiet, painful revelations. She began to talk, the words tumbling out of her, a dam of suppressed truths finally breaking. "He critiques everything," she whispered, sinking onto the edge of the couch again. "I never really noticed it, not until today. He says it's because he wants me to be my best self. The way I dress, he'll say, 'Are you sure you want to wear that? It doesn't really project the image we're going for.' My friends, he calls them my old life friends and says they don't understand the pressures we're under now. He'll make little comments, little jokes at their expense, until it just becomes easier not to see them as much." She looked up at me, her face a canvas of dawning horror. "Even my voice," she said, her own voice trembling. "I have this habit of talking with my hands when I get excited about something. He says it makes me look unsophisticated. He's been coaching me to keep my hands still when I'm talking to his clients. He says it's to help my career, to help me be more polished." My heart broke. It broke not with the pain of my own erasure, but with the pain of her slow, methodical dismantling. He hadn't just been isolating her from me. He had been isolating her from herself. He was sanding down all of her edges, dimming her light, reshaping her, piece by piece, into a woman who was more acceptable, more controllable, more his. I finally moved. I walked to the couch and sat, not beside her, but in the armchair I had occupied before. I was still her mother, but I was not going to be her fixer. I was going to be her guide, but she had to walk the path herself. "There is a difference between protection and isolation, Emily," I said, my voice gentle. "When you were a child and you were about to touch a hot stove, I would pull your hand back. I would stand between you and the danger. That is protection. It's an act of love designed to keep you safe." I leaned forward. "What he is doing is not protection. He is not standing between you and danger. He is convincing you that everything you are, your family, your friends, your personality, is the danger. And the only way to be safe is to get rid of all of it and cling only to him. That's not protection. That's possession." She was listening, her gaze locked on mine, absorbing every word as if it were oxygen. "And there is a difference between love and possession," I continued. "Love wants you to be the biggest, brightest, most authentic version of yourself. Possession wants you to be a smaller, quieter, more manageable version of what it thinks you should be. Love celebrates your light. Possession is terrified of it, because a woman who is shining brightly is a woman who might be seen by others. She's a woman who might leave." The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. It was the one that had been bothering me, a question I hadn't known how to ask. "This wedding," I said softly, "this huge, expensive public performance, was that your dream, Emily? Truly?" She looked down at her hands, which were twisting a loose thread on the couch cushion. She shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. "It was his. I wanted to go to the beach, just us, the officiant, maybe you and his parents. I told him that right at the beginning. I said I wanted something small, something real." "And what did he say?" I asked. "He said a small wedding was a sign of low ambition," she said, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. "He said that the wedding wasn't just for us. It was a statement. It was about showing his clients and his partners that he was a man of substance, a man who was building an empire. He said my desire for a small ceremony was sentimental, that it was small-minded. He made me feel foolish, like my dream was cheap." There it was. The entire sham laid bare. The $63,000 wasn't for her. It was for him. It was a marketing expense, a prop in the stage play of his success. My daughter, my beautiful, vibrant daughter, had been demoted from the love of his life to a co-star in his one-man show. She looked up at me, and for the first time, the confusion in her eyes was gone. It was replaced by a look of cold, hard, and utterly devastating certainty. She had woken up. Not because I had told her to, but because she had finally, in the quiet of her own heart, recognized the sound of her own cage rattling. "It was never for me," she said, her voice a flat line of realization. "None of it was ever for me." The realization landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. None of it was ever for me. The four walls of the luxury suite seemed to press in, charged with the weight of that one devastating sentence. It was the thesis statement for her entire relationship, the core truth that had been buried under 2 years of manipulation, gaslighting, and carefully constructed justifications. She didn't cry. The time for tears was over. The shock had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold, hard ash of reality. Her face, which had been a mask of grief and confusion, now settled into a look of quiet, resolute stillness. It was a stillness I recognized. It was the same stillness I had felt in my car after I'd made the call to the bank. It was the calm that comes after the storm has passed and you are left standing in the wreckage, finally able to see the full extent of the damage. "The flowers," she said, her voice a strange, distant monotone. "They're peonies, thousands of them. I'm allergic to peonies." I just looked at her, my heart aching with a sadness so profound it was almost silent. "I told him," she continued, her gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. "When we were meeting with the florist, I told him I was allergic. He just laughed. He put his arm around me and said to the florist, 'She's being dramatic. The peonies are non-negotiable. They're a symbol of prosperity.' He told me to take an antihistamine. He said a little allergic reaction was a small price to pay for the perfect aesthetic." She finally turned her head and looked at me, her eyes clear and dry. "I was going to walk down the aisle tomorrow, with my eyes watering and my nose running, surrounded by flowers I'm allergic to, in a dress he helped pick, to a man who called my dream cheap, in a ceremony designed to impress his clients. And I was going to call it love." She stood up. Her movements were no longer hesitant or shaky. They were imbued with a new, somber purpose. She walked over to where she had dropped her overnight bag and picked it up. "I have to go back," she said, her voice firm. A jolt of fear, primal and maternal, shot through me. "Emily," I started, my own voice betraying a hint of the old fixer's panic. "No," she said, cutting me off, but her tone wasn't dismissive. It was reassuring. "Not to go back to him. I have to go back to end it. This can't be a phone call. It can't be a text. I have to stand in that house, the one you bought, and I have to tell him, to his face, that it's over. I have to do it for myself." I saw it then. The first true glimmer of the woman she was supposed to be. The strength that had been buried under years of self-doubt and his systematic erosion was finally, painfully, breaking through the surface. She was right. This had to be her decision, her action. My fight had been to create the space for her to see the truth. Her fight was to act on it. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet with a respect she had just earned. What's the plan? The word plan seemed to solidify something in her. She had spent the last 2 years executing his plans. Now she was making her own. I'm going to tell him it's over, she said, thinking aloud. I'm going to pack a bag with my essentials, my laptop, my work files, my personal documents. Then I'm going to leave. The rest of the stuff. It's just stuff. It doesn't matter. And the wedding? I asked gently. There is no wedding, she said, the words simple and final. I am canceling the wedding, not postponing it. Canceling it. I am not marrying that man. She said it for herself, not for me. It wasn't a concession to please the mother who had frozen the funds. It was a declaration of self-preservation. It was the most powerful sentence she had ever spoken, because it was the first one that was truly hers. What do you need from me? I asked. Just be here, she said, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Can I come back here when it's done? This room is yours for as long as you need it, I said. I'll be right here. She gave me a small, watery smile, the first genuine smile I had seen on her face in years. It was a fragile, wounded thing, but it was real. Then she turned, squared her shoulders, and walked out of the room, leaving me alone once more in the quiet suite. This time, the waiting was different. It was laced with a sharp, anxious fear, not for myself, but for her. I knew the man she was confronting. I had heard the venom in his voice. The charming negotiator was gone. The puppet master whose strings had just been cut would be a creature of pure, undiluted rage. I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat by the window, my phone on the table beside me, face up. I watched the dawn break over the city, the black sky slowly turning a bruised purple, then a soft, hopeful gray. Every passing car on the street below was him, leaving. Every distant siren was a sign of a fight gone wrong. My imagination was a torture chamber. The call came 2 hours later. It was her. I snatched the phone on the first ring. I'm okay, she said, her voice shaking but intact. I'm in my car. I'm a few blocks away. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. What happened? It was bad, she said, and I could hear the adrenaline and shock vibrating in her voice. He didn't believe me at first. He just laughed. He said I was being hysterical, that I was letting my mother ruin our lives. He tried to pull me into a hug, to calm me down, to manage me. She took a shuddering breath, and I didn't let him. I stood my ground. I told him, no, Tyler, it's over, and I just kept repeating it. It's over. He finally realized I was serious, and he just exploded. I closed my eyes, picturing it. What did he do? He started screaming. He called me an ungrateful bitch. He said I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me. He told me I was nothing without him. He said he had made me, that he had built me into someone important, and that I would go back to being a nobody the second I walked out that door. The classic abuser's script. You are nothing without me. The final, desperate attempt to reassert control. And then, her voice broke. Then he threatened me. He said he knows people at my company. He has a contact, a senior VP he plays golf with. He said he would make one phone call and have my career ruined. He said he would tell everyone that I was unstable, that I had a breakdown. He said he would destroy me. The cold, hard rage I had felt in Andrew's office returned tenfold. He won't, I said, my voice a low, dangerous growl. He is a coward, Emily. And cowards who make threats like that are terrified of the light. We have everything, the texts, the voicemails. Andrew will shut that down before he can even finish dialing the number. I know, she whispered. It was just hearing it, hearing the hate in his voice. The person I thought I loved. He looked at me like he wanted to kill me. Come back to the hotel, I said, my voice softening. Just come back here. We'll figure out the rest together. When she arrived, she was pale and trembling, but she was whole. She had faced the monster in his lair, and she had walked out, free. We sat together on the couch, and for the first time, I allowed myself to put my arm around her. It wasn't the hug of a fixer, it was the hug of a fellow survivor. We spent the next hour creating a new plan, a cancellation plan. It was methodical, practical, and in its own way, healing. It was the act of dismantling the fantasy, piece by painful piece. First, the church. St. Andrew's, ironically. Emily called the priest herself, her voice shaking but clear, and explained that the wedding was canceled due to irreconcilable differences. Second, the family. She made 2 calls, one to her closest aunt, one to her maid of honor, and asked them to spread the word quietly and discreetly among the guests who were already in town. No drama, no details, just a simple, "The wedding has been called off." Third, the guests. For everyone else, we devised a simple, elegant solution. We would have a small, dignified sign printed and placed on an easel at the entrance to the church. The wedding of Emily Reynolds and Tyler Brooks has been canceled. We apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. It was clean, final, and offered no room for gossip. Fourth, and most importantly, the vendors. The flowers, the caterer, the band, the photographer. All of them had been paid deposits or paid in full from the frozen $63,000. "Andrew can handle this," I said, already dialing his number. "We will unfreeze the funds not for the wedding, but for the cancellation. We will pay every single vendor what they are owed for the cancellation clauses in their contracts. No one will be left out of pocket because of his fantasy." It was the final act of taking control. The money that had been a tool of her exploitation would now become the tool of her liberation. It would be used to cleanly and honorably dismantle the production, ensuring that the only person who truly paid a price for this debacle was the man who had orchestrated it. As Emily made the last of her calls, a strange sense of peace settled in the room. The fallout was just beginning, but the decision had been made. The bomb had been diffused. In the quiet of the self-respect suite, surrounded by the wreckage of a life that was never really hers, my daughter was, for the first time, truly and completely on her own. And she was not alone. The plan was a fortress. It was logical, dignified, and designed to minimize collateral damage. We had accounted for every detail, from the priest to the peonies. We had built a wall of quiet, respectable action. We had forgotten one thing. A cornered rat doesn't care about dignity. It only cares about biting back. The first shot was fired less than 12 hours after Emily had walked out of his life. It came, as I should have expected, not as a direct confrontation, but as a public performance. Emily's phone buzzed on the hotel room desk where it was charging. It was a notification from Facebook. Her maid of honor had sent her a screenshot with a single ominous message. "You need to see this." Emily opened the image. I watched her from across the room as the color drained from her face, leaving her a pale, still statue. She held the phone out to me, her hand trembling. It was a post on Tyler's Facebook page, public for the world to see. It was a picture of the two of them, the same one from his engagement announcement. Happy, smiling, the perfect couple. But the caption was a masterclass in manipulative spin. "It is with the heaviest of hearts that I have to announce our wedding is no longer happening," it began, dripping with false sorrow. "Sometimes, despite our best efforts, we cannot save the people we love from their own demons or from the toxic influences of their past. Emily is a wonderful woman, but she has been struggling, and in her fragile state, she has been manipulated by her mother into making a decision I know she will one day regret. I ask for your prayers for her healing and for your understanding as we navigate this painful time. My focus now is only on Emily's well-being." I read the words twice, the calculated cruelty of it taking my breath away. He had done it. He had taken our private pain and twisted it into a public spectacle, casting himself as the heartbroken hero and Emily as the fragile, unstable victim. And me? I was the villain, the toxic influence, the manipulative mother who had destroyed her daughter's happiness. He hadn't just created a lie, he had created a perfectly crafted narrative designed to preemptively destroy Emily's credibility and protect his own image. The threat to ruin her career wasn't just about a phone call to a VP. It was about this: laying the public groundwork to paint her as mentally unwell, a damsel in distress he had tried so valiantly to save. Emily sank onto the bed, her face ashen. "He did it," she whispered. "He's telling everyone I'm crazy. Who will believe me now?" The old Maggie would have raged. She would have called him screaming, defending her daughter's honor and her own. But I was not the old Maggie. I was a woman who had spent a day with an attorney and had a folder on her phone labeled evidence. "We are not going to play his game," I said, my voice a low, steady anchor in her sea of panic. "His game is played with spin, with emotions, with lies. We are going to play our game. And our game is played with facts." I picked up my own phone. "He has established a narrative. Now we establish a timeline." For the next hour, we worked. Not as a distraught mother and daughter, but as a crisis management team. I created my first public Facebook post in over 5 years. My profile picture was a simple, smiling headshot from a few years ago, a picture of a calm, reasonable woman. My post was the antithesis of his. It was not emotional, it was factual. In light of the recent public post by Tyler Brooks regarding the cancellation of his wedding to my daughter, Emily Reynolds, I feel compelled to provide some clarity and a factual timeline of events, I wrote. On Tuesday morning, after driving 800 miles to attend her wedding, I was informed by Mr. Brooks and my daughter that I was not welcome at the ceremony, which was for immediate family only. I was told that my financial contribution of $63,000 was my ticket to the reception, where I could sit at a table for friends of the family. I let that sink in. A simple, undeniable statement of fact. Later that day, I was subjected to a series of verbally abusive phone calls and text messages from Mr. Brooks, in which he insulted me and demanded I release the funds I had frozen. When my daughter made the brave and difficult decision to cancel the wedding for her own well-being, Mr. Brooks threatened to use his professional contacts to have her fired and her reputation destroyed. I paused. This was the critical moment. Do I show the proof? Andrew's voice echoed in my head. If they try to paint you as the villain, we show them this. For anyone questioning the validity of my daughter's decision or my role in it, I continued, my fingers typing with cold precision, I am attaching a few items for context. First, a screenshot of the official bank notification confirming the freeze of the $63,000 transfer timestamped Tuesday at 9:14 a.m., long before any manipulation could have occurred. Second, a small sample of the text messages I received from Mr. Brooks shortly thereafter. Please note the language used. I uploaded the images, the crisp official bank notification, and 2 of Tyler's texts, his profile picture clearly visible next to the blue bubbles. One read, "You are a bitter, manipulative old woman, and you are going to die alone." The other, "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will destroy you both." I ended the post with one final dignified paragraph. This is not a family drama. This is a story about a pattern of financial control and emotional abuse, and about the courage it takes to walk away from it. My daughter is not fragile or manipulated. She is strong, she is brave, and she has my unwavering support. We will be making no further public statements on this matter. I hit post. The effect was instantaneous. It was like dropping a boulder into a placid pond. His narrative was built on the quicksand of emotion and innuendo. My counter-narrative was built on the bedrock of evidence, receipts. The comments started to roll in, first from my own small circle of friends and family, expressing shock and support. But then it started to spread. A cousin of mine shared it, then a friend of hers. His post had been public, and so was mine. The 2 stories were now sitting side by side in the harsh, unforgiving light of the internet, and people could choose which one to believe. And then something happened that neither of us could have ever predicted. A comment appeared on my post from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Sarah Jensen. "This sounds familiar," she wrote. "3 years ago, I dated Tyler Brooks. He convinced me to quit my job to support his vision for our future, had me drain my savings for a down payment on a condo that was only in his name, and systematically cut me off from all my friends, who he called bad influences. He told me my anxiety was a weakness he was trying to fix. When I finally left, he told everyone I was emotionally unstable. Thank you for speaking up. My heart stopped. I read the comment to Emily, my voice trembling slightly. An hour later, another one appeared, this time from a woman named Chloe Davies. Adding my name to this list, the language is almost identical. The love bombing, the isolation from family, the critiques about my clothes and my career, the constant narrative that he was building me into a better version of myself. He bled me dry financially and then discarded me when I had nothing left to give. It took me a year of therapy to understand that it was classic narcissistic abuse. Emily, you are not alone. One by one, they came forward, a digital chorus of ghosts from Tyler's past, a third woman, a fourth. Each story was a mirror image of the last, a chilling echo of the same pattern, the same language, the same playbook. The toxic family, the fragile girlfriend he was trying to save, the financial exploitation disguised as a shared future. His carefully constructed image of the heartbroken hero was being publicly dismantled, not by me, but by a jury of his own victims. My post had not been an attack. It had been a signal fire. It had given them the courage and the corroborating evidence to finally speak their own truths. The narrative was no longer about a family dispute. It had become a public expose of a predator. By the next morning, the tide had completely turned. Friends of his, clients, colleagues who had initially posted messages of support on his page were quietly deleting their comments. The public court of opinion had seen the receipts and the verdict was in. The final blow came in the late afternoon. It was an email to Emily, forwarded from her maid of honor, who worked at the same large tech firm as Tyler's golf buddy, VP. The company's HR department had been anonymously sent a link to the Facebook thread. An internal investigation had been launched into Tyler's conduct, specifically regarding his threats to use his professional connections to retaliate against a former partner. His image as a rising star, a man of substance, had been irrevocably torched. He hadn't destroyed her career. In his blind, arrogant rage, he had destroyed his own. I looked at Emily. She was reading the stories from the other women, tears streaming down her face. But these were not tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of validation, tears of recognition. She was crying for the woman she had almost become, and for the other women who hadn't been as lucky. He had tried to control the story, to spin the truth to his advantage. But the truth, once it's armed with evidence, has a power all its own. His web of lies had been built in the dark, one victim at a time. But in the light of day, with all the threads exposed, it wasn't a web at all. It was just a fragile, pathetic thing, and it was coming apart at the seams. The storm did not end overnight. The winds of the public fallout still howled for a few days, the digital wreckage of Tyler's reputation drifting through the social media ether. But Emily and I were no longer in the eye of it. We were in the quiet, calm center we had created for ourselves in the anonymous luxury of the hotel suite. We had barricaded the door against the chaos and begun the slow, quiet work of rebuilding. We stayed in Denver for another week. That first day after the truth came out, Emily slept for 14 hours, a deep, healing sleep of pure emotional exhaustion. When she woke, something in her had settled. The frantic, hunted look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a profound, somber quiet. She was like a city after a devastating earthquake, battered and shaken, but still standing, the sun rising over a landscape that was forever changed. Our days fell into a new, gentle rhythm. We didn't talk much about Tyler. His name was a ghost in the room, but his power was gone. The stories from the other women had been a painful but necessary exorcism, confirming that Emily's experience wasn't a unique failure of love, but a textbook case of predation. She wasn't broken. She had been targeted. The distinction was everything. Instead of rehashing the trauma, we focused on the practical steps of untangling her life from his. Andrew, our steadfast general, handled the legal side with brisk efficiency. He facilitated the return of her personal belongings from the house using a third-party moving company so she would never have to see Tyler again. He ensured the lease on her apartment, which Tyler had co-signed and held over her head, was legally and cleanly transferred into her name alone. Every tie was systematically and surgically severed. The Emily who emerged from that week was not the same woman who had knocked on my hotel room door in the middle of the night. The journey back to herself was slow. At first, she was hesitant, deferential, constantly asking for my opinion. What should I do now? Where should I go? The muscle of her own decision-making had atrophied. Gently but firmly, I refused to answer. What do you want to do, Emily? I would ask. What feels right to you? It was a painful process for her. She had been conditioned to seek his approval for every choice, from her lunch order to her career ambitions. Learning to listen to her own voice again was like learning a new language. But slowly, she began to speak it. She decided she didn't want to stay in Denver, a city now haunted by his ghost. She wanted a fresh start. She applied for a transfer within her company to their office in Austin, a city where she had old college friends, the old life friends Tyler had tried so hard to erase. Her company, far from firing her, had been incredibly supportive. The public implosion of a man who had threatened to use his connections against one of their employees had made Tyler a liability. They fast-tracked her transfer, eager to put distance between their brand and his toxicity. 2 months later, I was helping her unpack boxes in a bright, airy apartment in Austin, the Texas sunlight streaming through the windows. The walls were her own chosen color, a soft, calming sea green. Her new friends, the ones she was slowly reconnecting with, came over with pizza and beer, their laughter filling the space. They were loud and funny and unapologetically themselves, and as I watched them interact with Emily, I saw a lightness in her I hadn't seen in years. It was in the small things. The way she threw her head back when she laughed, a full-throated sound of genuine joy, not the tinkling, managed laugh she had used around him. The way she talked with her hands again, her gestures animated and expressive as she told a story. The way she stated her own opinion on a movie or a book without a flicker of apology in her eyes. The woman he had tried to sand down and polish into a dull reflection of himself was gone. My daughter was coming back to me, piece by piece. One evening, we were sitting on her new balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky. Her phone rang. I saw the name on the screen. Daniel. A new friend, a colleague from her Austin office who had taken her out for coffee a few times. "Hey, I've got to take this," she said to me with a small, easy smile. "It's my mom," she said into the phone. "Yeah, she's here. I'm so glad." She listened for a moment, then laughed. "No, I can't tonight. Mom and I have a date with a bottle of wine and some bad TV. Talk to you tomorrow." She hung up, her face relaxed and happy. He had wanted her to see me as a chain, but this new man in her life, this kind, normal man, had heard she was with her mother, and his response was clearly one of encouragement. He wasn't threatened by our bond. He respected it. It was a small moment, but it was everything. My own life had changed too. The sale of the 2 rental properties in Dallas had been finalized. The financial cushion it provided was more than a number in a bank account. It was a ticket to a freedom I had never allowed myself. For so long, my wealth had been a resource for Emily. Now, it was a resource for me. And then there was Michael Hayes, a retired history professor I had met in my book club a year ago, a kind, quiet, intelligent man with a gentle smile and eyes that held a deep respect for family. He had watched my quiet devotion to Emily for months, and after the dust settled, he had asked me to dinner. Our relationship was a slow, comfortable bloom, a stark contrast to the dramatic, high-stakes passion Emily had mistaken for love. With Michael, there was no possession, only partnership. He loved hearing stories about Emily, and he encouraged our now daily phone calls. He saw my role as a mother not as a liability, but as a part of who I was. The estate plan Andrew and I had so carefully constructed remained firmly in place. It was my final act of protection for Emily, the guardrails on her new, independent life. When I updated it to include Michael as a beneficiary, the core principles remained. Emily would inherit the bulk of my estate, but the conditions were ironclad. The trust was a silent guardian, ensuring that her inheritance could never again be used as leverage by a manipulative partner. It was a legacy of love, but a love with boundaries. Last week, Emily called me, her voice buzzing with an excitement I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. "Mom, guess what? Daniel and I are taking a trip. Just a long weekend. We're going to the beach." My heart swelled. The small, simple dream that had been dismissed as cheap and sentimental was finally coming true. She was getting her beach trip, not as a grand performance, but as a quiet, authentic expression of her own happiness. As I sit here now in the passenger seat of Michael's comfortable sedan, watching the Texas landscape roll by on our way to visit Emily in Austin, I think about the woman I was just a few months ago, the woman who drove 800 miles, fueled by a desperate, anxious hope, the woman who believed that a mother's love had to be a form of self-erasure, a constant act of giving until there was nothing left. She was a good woman, a loving woman, but she was wrong. Love is not about erasing yourself. It is not about becoming a resource to be depleted. True love, the kind that lasts, is about holding a space for another person to become their fullest, brightest self. And sometimes, most times, that requires building a wall to keep out the darkness. The boundaries I built were not an act of rejection. They were an act of profound love. A love for my daughter, yes, but also, finally, a love for myself. They didn't destroy our family. They saved it. They protected it from the lies that had nearly consumed it whole. Emily didn't need a fixer. She needed a lighthouse, a steady, unmoving light in the storm, guiding her back to a safe shore, the shore of her own worth. Waking up to my own worth was the only way to turn that light on, and it has changed everything. This story is a powerful reminder that true love is not self-erasure. For years, I believed a mother's role was to give endlessly, even when it meant disappearing myself. But my kindness was mistaken for weakness, and my generosity became a weapon used against me. It was only when I chose self-respect over silence that everything changed. Setting boundaries is not an act of rejection. It is the ultimate act of protection for your legacy, your peace, and the very people you love. Sometimes, the most powerful word a loving heart can learn to say is no. Now, if you liked this story, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me which part surprised you the most. Each subscription and comment from you is a great motivation for us to keep sharing more meaningful things in life. Thank you very much.